All right, welcome back to my channel, Mr. Global, globally recognized oil and gas expert, Matt Randolph, doing another long form video. Today we're going to talk about peak oil theory. Before we get into that, I encourage you to go back and watch the very last video I published about potential collusion between Donald Trump and OPEC during the Biden administration. It's a fascinating bit of looking into what's going on there. Really cool stuff, I think. This video, peak oil. I get asked about peak oil all the time. It may be one of my most commonly asked questions. That, besides, hey, why is gas at one gas station 10 cents more than another? Yeah. If you're wondering that, it's because they charge more. Okay. Seriously. Peak oil, a theory in crisis. Why predictions keep failing. Why peak oil predictions keep failing. And for over a century, experts have warned that the world is running out of oil. And time again, they're wrong, that their predictions have failed. The concept of peak oil, the point where global oil production reaches maximum level before entering terminal decline, has been, a scientific theory and a cultural prophecy, for lack of a better term. But why has it been so consistently wrong? And does it still matter? Does it still matter in today's energy landscape? So first, we're going to start with the origins of peak oil. A gentleman by the name of Marion King Hubbert, who was a geologist for shale exploration. And, back in the 50s, I believe it was 1956, he predicted, he ran some modeling, and he predicted that U.S. oil production would peak sometime between 1965 and 1970. And keep in mind, the only type of oil production we had in 1956 was through conventional wells. So that was his whole basis of knowledge. We didn't have a lot of the things we have now. We didn't have unconventional wells. So, he predicted that, the United States would reach peak oil 1965 to 1970. And he was actually correct. Yeah, to a point. U.S. output peaked in 1970 at 9.6 million barrels a day before declining in conventional wells, which was all we had back then. We didn't have unconventional wells. So Hubbert's model was based on a bell curve production trend, and it suggested that global oil production would peak around 2000 at 12.5 billion barrels per year, about 33 million barrels a day. That was way off. That particular one was way off. By 2012, global oil production had doubled his estimate, reaching 26.67 billion barrels of oil annually. And why was Herbert partially right, but mostly wrong? He was correct on the U.S. peak. His model accurately predicted the decline of conventional U.S. oil fields. Unconventional fields did not exist at that time. It wasn't a thing. He was definitely wrong on the global peak, though. Definitely wrong about that. But, smart guy. Smart guy. He underestimated technological advances like, fracking, deep water drilling, unconventional oil shale, obviously. Right? Yeah. Peak oil forecasts have been notoriously unreliable, obviously, because we still haven't reached peak oil. So any forecast that was forecasted before today would have been wrong, right? And funny fact, in 1919, I believe, 1919, the U.S. Geological Society predicted that peak oil would be 1921. Yeah, that's a thing. Oh man! And then 1956, Marion Hubbard, he forecasted the global peak by 2000. He was wrong by decades. 2005, 2008. Experts like Matt Simmons and Kenneth Defies, they declared peak oil had arrived. This was right before the U.S. shale boom, and they claimed peak oil had already arrived. That was in 2005, 2008. And of course, the U.S. shale boom blew that out of the water, right? And in the 2020s, a lot of analysts now argue that peak demand, not supply, will come first due to electric vehicles and renewables. And I completely agree with that. We used to talk about peak oil production. And when will we produce so much oil we literally cannot produce anymore? We don't talk about that anymore. Now we talk about peak oil in terms of demand, because renewable energy, electric vehicles, everything involved with the energy transition is likely to curb oil demand long before we reach our production capabilities. And I agree with that 100%. And why do the predictions keep failing? Obviously, the one thing I have said this my entire career. It's about a lot of things. The thing that causes people to miss predictions so much is discounting technology and not understanding how great technology is. And I understand that we're talking about technology that hadn't been invented yet. In 1956, when Hubbard made his prediction about peak oil. But you do have to factor in some sort of buffer for that, don't you? Like, and I think, well, surely someday we'll come up with something. Maybe in 1956, they hadn't seen the technology advances that we've seen today, and maybe they weren't expecting it like we expect today. I expect things to get wild in the oil and gas industry in the coming years. So things like hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, those things that unlocked an enormous amount of oil, especially in the Permian Basin. And even unconventional oil, the Canadian oil sands, Venezuela's Orinoco Belt, and deep water fields, they've expanded supply greatly. The economics of all of it, high oil prices, new extraction methods. So it's really hard to predict that kind of stuff, and that's why I don't. But I do think it's coming, sooner rather than later. The shale revolution, peak oil's biggest blind spot, easily, right? The U.S. shale boom shattered all of the assumptions about peak oil. From 2008 to 2018, U.S. oil output doubled, making us the world's top producer. 2025, Permian Basin alone, 5.7 million barrels a day, just out of the Permian Basin. Keep in mind, that was a field that in the year 2000 was a ghost town. They said it was dead forever, would never come back. And now it produces 48% of oil produced in the United States. Yeah. And so, a lot of the critics around shale, talk about how fast the wells decline, 60 to 70% in the first year. But with continuous drilling and innovation and technology and efficiency and cost savings, they just continue to drill those wells, right? So the new debate is peak demand versus peak supply, right? The question isn't when will oil run out, but is when will demand peak. And the EIA, or I should say the IEA, not to be confused with the EIA like I just did, the IEA predicts peak demand by 2030. Due to EVs and climate policies. And what's really fascinating to me is how far apart these organizations are. that are predicting peak demand. So they're saying 2030. OPEC sees rising demand until 2045, mostly driven by Asia. Yeah. But what about BP? BP suggests demand could double by 2050. Listen, BP is nuts. Demand is not going to double by 2050. That's not a thing. We have seen the growth in oil demand slow drastically over where we have expected it. Oil demand is not going to double by 2050. That's not a thing. I don't know who at BP came up with that. That's nuts. That's nuts. It's not even possible. It's not even possible. Basically, like oil demand would have to increase by what? About 4 million barrels a day every year between now and 2025. We'll be lucky if we get to 1 million this year. We got a little over 1 million last year. We would have to do 4 every year. BP's lost their mind. I don't know what BP's thinking. Maybe they're thinking we're just going to completely not only abandon renewable energy, but we're just going to tear down everything we've built and start over. Yeah, that's not a thing. It's not. So will oil ever truly peak is really the question. And the answer is yes. I say it's sooner rather than later. Even if demand plateaus, though, one thing all the experts agree is once it peaks, it's going to plateau, and it's going to stay there for a very long time. Things like petrochemicals, plastics, aviation fuels, all the other uses we have for fossil fuels will remain and grow. Petrochemicals is a booming industry right now that is really the one thing that's really contributing to demand growth we have right now. Petrochemicals. You're going to hear about that a lot in the future if you don't know that much about it already. And, of course, geopolitical matters. OPEC controls supply. U.S. shale says they act as a swing producer. I don't necessarily agree with that. But the legacy of peak oil is one ridden with failure. It's the best way I can describe it, right? Peak oil, it wasn't a hoax, but it was certainly a flawed model that underestimated, what's the word I'm looking for? Human ingenuity? Yeah. But still, resource limits exist. And that holds value, right? So, when are we going to reach peak oil demand? Listen, like I said, it's coming sooner rather than later. We're seeing oil demand growth drop consistently year over year now. And unless there's some big rejection of the expansion of further renewables or some big rejection of EVs, I don't see that slowing down. I don't see that slowing down. I tend to agree. I'm actually somewhere between the IEA and OPEC's prediction of 2045. I'm like halfway between there. I'm like 2035. Remember the IEA's at 2030. I'm pushing it. You got to know the IEA. They're not like the EIA. The IEA is international. They're very green-minded. They're big proponents of renewable and environmental or renewable energy, and so they tend to like to say that fossil fuels are dead before they are. And my deal, it's just a guess. I don't even call this a prediction. I call it a guess. It's a guess. It's what it is. It's a guess. But once peak oil demand peaks, it will plateau. and it will stay high for a very long time before it starts that slow curve down. If you were to Google an image, and if you were to search for an image of what peak oil would look like on a graph, they'll show you something that goes straight up and straight down. Now, if you were looking at, I don't know, a 5,000 year chart, yes, that's what it would look like. Yeah, but look at a 300 year chart. Look at a 200 year chart. Hell, you don't even need a 300. Look at a 200 year chart, or just look at a chart, any chart. Just don't look at a 1,000-year chart. They show those on 1,000-year charts, so they look like they go straight up and straight down. Once it peaks, it's going to stay up there for quite a long time. Quite a long time. So all of these people saying that peak oil is the end of oil, no, not even close. It'll take us a decade. Once peak oil arrives, it'll take us another decade to get back to levels of demand that we were just a few years prior to peak oil. It'll take us a decade to maybe go back, I don't know, 5 years. It's going to be a long time, is what I'm saying. It's going to be a long time. Once it arrives, fossil fuels are here. They're here to stay for a very long time. So that's my little piece on peak oil demand. I really appreciate you guys spending time with me today. Once again, please like, share, comment. I'm not. This isn't going to be the only type of content I do. I'm still going to do the other type of content. Go back and look at that last video I did. Thank you guys. If you have anything you want me to discuss on here, please leave it in the comments. If you have any, something you want to learn about, something I can cover, please leave it in the comments. Thanks.